fictional shared world of fantasy, science fiction, but it's a secondary world. So that means we're building a world out from scratch, which is invented planets, invented history, invented myths, invented biologies, invented physics, everything as a playground for storytelling. And what this has enabled us to do is basically have this rich, fertile world to be very creative in, to tell unique stories in. But one of the other things we also wanted to really do was infuse this world with a sense of, for lack of a better term, Africanness, right from the beginning. Because some of you may be aware, science fiction and fantasy is very popular, especially in visual media, but also in written media as well. But a lot of it has a Eurocentric view, right? A lot of fantasy worlds are essentially, you know, reimagined versions of medieval Europe and so on, right? And they build on those myths and concepts. And what we wanted to do was take that a step further by essentially building out, it's not just a fictional, say, location, it's an entire fictional planetary system with 5 separate planets, with lots of different population groups and biologies and creatures with their own history and biology. So, today you have with me three of my partners in creating this world. Lola already introduced them. I'll just quickly give a quick highlight. So Stephen Embleton is the author of Soul Searching and Bones and Runes. Sherilyn Toomey is the author of They Made Us Blood and Fury. And Dare Shegun-Falowo is a writer and the author of the upcoming Caged Ocean Dove. And we've been working on this for a while. So, what I'll do first is I will give a very quick opportunity to Cheryl, if you would like to elaborate on Sauti a bit beyond what I've said, tell people what it is, and what people should know about its key elements.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I think the most important things to know about the Sautiverse, I mean, I think as Wale has already touched on, it's a very Afrocentric universe. We really made an effort to make it as steeped in genuine, actual African culture as possible. It's a universe in which there are 5 planets. It's a binary star system as well, which means 2 suns rather than 1. And there's a very specific dynamic between these 5 planets. It's also, as I think you can probably tell from the creation myth that we just showed you, more matriarchal than patriarchal, in that it has a creator goddess rather than a creator god, and that informs a lot of the mythology, a lot of the religion, and a lot of the cultural aspects of the world. The 5 planets have very specific characteristics, which we took a lot of time to kind of think about what these different planets would look like based on their positions, their relationships to each other, their relationships to the 2 suns. And so, we have a really interesting cosmology and really interesting elements of these different planets and the environmental aspects that affect the characters that live in these different worlds. So we have Zizefeni, which is sort of the dominant planet. We have Wimbo, which is an Earth analog. So out of all the planets, it's the most similar to the Earth that we know. We have Orinorin, which is, I think, I could be biased, but I think it's the most interesting of the 5 planets.
I agree.
I hope that you will all get a chance to see exactly how exciting it is to be part of that world. There's the world Maui, which no longer exists. A lot of the focus now is on Maui's moon, which is called Pina. And then there's Ekukwe, which is a planet of echoes, a planet of echo caves. And that also makes for a really interesting environment and really interesting sort of characteristics of the people that live there. Apart from that, I would say that it's really, we also really made an effort to create a world that's really inclusive. That was a very deliberate thing that we tried to do. So inclusive in terms of, people of different genders, different sexualities, different abilities. So these are all things that you will see throughout the stories that are set in this world. It's also a world that focuses very much on sound as the sort of driving force. There's quite a lot of details about how that works, but mainly sound is the most important resource in this world. Am I missing anything?
No, I think that's a great summary. You've given people a lot of flavor of what's in the world. So just to give a sense of timeline of what this world is like, because when you're inventing a whole world, just like the Earth itself, it has a physical history, right? Depending on what version of that you subscribe to. From a scientific view, starting from the Big Bang, all the way till now, you have the formation of systems, the expansion of the universe, and eventually, forming clusters that become planets, right? And some become stars. So we did the same thing for this world, which you can imagine is a massive undertaking. Starting from billions of years ago, we have an imagined physical history of this world. And I won't go into all the details of that, but suffice it to say, we have it from the original creation that generated the entire universe, including the formation of the twin star system, up until the formation of the planets that are orbiting this dual star system. And then the evolution of life. And we have our own imagined history of how that happened, which is on one of the planets, you first had life spawn, and then the inhabitants of that world, they developed, and they spread out and colonized the entire five planets in the rest of the system. However, to complicate things and make it more interesting, what we've done is we have another imagined physical event, which is a solar flare, a supermassive solar flare that at some point in their history knocked out all communications between that original civilization. So now they were all one people, but because of this solar flare, they've become isolated and they've gone millions of years developing without knowing of each other. So they're essentially family, but they don't know. And essentially where most of our stories reconnect is where they have rediscovered each other, but they have different characteristics. They've evolved their own unique spins on their shared mythology and history, but also their language, right? And as Cheryl mentioned, sound is a really important concept in this world. And I'll allow Stephen elaborate a bit more on that as to why language and sound were key in our development of this world.
Thanks, Wale. So as you can see in the creation myth, the magic in word is one of the most important central concepts to the Sauti universe. And the magic system that we use is audible, it's about sound, it's about the spoken word. And us as writers, fairly early on, we settled on the power of sound and magic as being a driving force. We know what the magic of words does for us as writers and for readers. So that was quite an interesting one to center our world on. And so, sound, from the spoken word, oral traditions, that's very key to some of the aspects of the cultures that we have developed in the Sauti universe. And, you look at the spoken word poetry last night to understand the power of that kind of performance, what sound does. And so beyond just words and hearing, sound has a physical impact. It impacts your body. And so for a magic system to be based on that, we just thought that was quite powerful and fairly unique in terms of anything else that's out there. So that was the real kernel of where we began. And then from that, I'm personally interested in linguistics, particularly from Southern Africa, the various dialects that are around there. And then coming into the Sauti collective with the other writers that are spread out all over the world, our various backgrounds, our various traditions, our various languages, just bringing those in collectively and not using any one African language or dialect as our roadmap, but speaking with a linguist, Pule Kajano-Linji, and giving us insights into how we can develop that ancient lost language, and that is what we bring through in snippets. So it's not a fully developed language, it's been lost, but we needed something that just filters through into the naming system, locations, the planet names, the mythology, everything. So again, bringing it back to sound, Pule just advised, he said, you've got sound, you use that in your language. Use the echoes, so repeated words, repeated phrases. Some of the African languages, they have implosives, so you speak outward, but there are some where you're drawing in breath. Use that in the language, in the names. Echoes, reversal of words, so that was quite an exciting layer to add, and I think that has really given the Sauti universe something very unique in that sound building of the world. So that was quite creative.
Yeah, so what you will see is, in terms of naming things in the Sauti universe, nothing is accidental, nothing is random, no names are chosen just because they sound cool. There is actually a very detailed thought process behind everything. Almost every name for things that we use in this world is inspired or taken from an African language, and we try to sample from as many as possible. Of course, we favor the ones we know and are most familiar with, but we try as much as possible to cover the breadth and variety of languages available in Africa. And then we bring it into our own structural system, which Stephen talked about, which is taking words and reversing them or adding like an echo sound. So we mentioned one of the planets is called Orin Orin, which actually comes from the Yoruba word for song, which is Orin, but then you reverse it and have the sound reflect back, and now it becomes Orin Orin, right? So you have that bounce back, and that's just an example of some of the elements that we've put in. One of the other elements that I think is really interesting in this world is, from the beginning, we wanted to have a mixture of fantasy elements, magical elements, and technological elements as well. We didn't want it to lean too strongly into just the science or too strongly into just the magic where it's just fantasy. We want both, because again, in many African traditions, we hold both. We have this kind of double consciousness where we believe in multiple things at the same time, and we want that to be a central tenet of the world. So I'll give you the opportunity, Dario, if you can give an example of some of your favorite mergers of science and of magic and technology in this world.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Well, there are a lot of those sorts of mixtures across the world, because there are 5 worlds and each of them has different cultures and different relationships to sound. And well, based on the stories that I've read thus far, I'd say my favorite is the maker of an automaton named Zova. So an automaton named Zova is a story about an AI coming into empathy, and it happens on Mawepina. And the AI is telling its story, and then towards the end of the story, it meets its maker. And it has always referred to its maker as a goddess, Rishi, or Orisiris, I can't remember. So I was expecting, when I got to that part of the story, that it would be a regular god figure. But then in the description, it's composed of nanobots or nanites. And so the goddess is able to have at least 4 or 5 forms. So I think that's a very interesting, it's really stuck in my head, and I keep thinking of it. It's made the story really powerful for me. And then there are other ones. Almost every story has a good example, because I think something that we pull from is the idea of indigenous sciences, because for indigenous peoples, magic is a science, so we are able to reach into that idea and pull into our storytelling. So because there's a lot of sound, so simple drums can become able to power spaceships, or people singing mixed with crystal fuel systems is able to also power ships. people have there are people who have abilities to shape music in reverse, so to speak. So a sort of, I can't remember what it's called, when you play music, the visualizer. So it's a sort of three-dimensional visualizer, and the person is moving the visualizer, and in reverse, music is playing rather than the music coming and creating the visualizer. In Cheryl's story, there is a very technical way in which sound is extracted and put in some jars, which seems pretty simple, but I think that's a technology too. So in Stephen's story, performing and speaking is actually it's a very delicate process, and it becomes almost technological in the arrangements of like the drummers and the singer and the people and the person who speaks. And if there's a bit of a slight shift in how the arrangements occur, there could be a catastrophe for the people who hear the stories that are being told. I think that's also technological. So I believe that the idea sort of expands on what I think technology is. And we are still birthing new ideas, really. It hasn't stopped. So it's a very rich thing. And I like how it roots into like indigenous ideas of magic and science as being basically the same thing. So thank you.
Yeah, so Daria gave you some really interesting examples. I know it might be difficult to imagine if you're not used to reading science fiction and fantasy, some of the things he's describing, but I find them very exciting. And as Daria alluded to, one of the key things we wanted to do with this world is we're not just creating for creativity's sake. I mean, that is valuable in itself, and for pure entertainment values. But as you can see, one of the things we really wanted to do with this was to bring African philosophy to the fore in a fantastical sense, right? Because in the real world, what you found over the years is a lot of African philosophies, ways of thinking, traditional ways of understanding the world have been kind of written off as primitive, a bit savage, maybe not modern. And as an engineer and a very, very, very committed scientist, I find this deeply offensive because science is nothing more than natural philosophy and a way of understanding the world. Science is not a collection of a body of knowledge. It is a way of understanding the world, of gathering observations and putting them into a system. And so what we've really tried to go back to is what are those ways that traditional African groups used to understand the world and maybe merged it a bit with culture. And we take some of the cores of that and try to infuse it into this fantasy world to build up this mixture of science and technology and infuse it with a sense of richness, right? So that's one of the things we've been trying to do. And so far we have 10 stories written in this world. We're currently working on producing an anthology, a collection. So it will be a book of all the stories set in this world. But we have bigger goals than just publishing a book. The idea, as I mentioned, is for this to be a playground of the imagination, essentially. And not just for us that created the world, but for everybody. So one of the things we're kind of innovating with a little bit as well is in the publishing format. We're not going to follow a traditional publishing ownership model for this world, where someone creates something, they own the rights, they publish books, they make money off it. We're, again, going back to root, something you find in many traditional African cultures is a sense of community ownership. So it's a shared world for a reason. We're not just sharing in the creative process, but in the publishing and in the financial process. So there's 10 of us that are the original creators of the world, and we call ourselves the Sauti Collective. But everybody will eventually be able to contribute to this world. And you don't need to go through IP lawyers or, negotiate whatever. Essentially, all you need is an interesting idea and to send a pitch. So we're going to go through a few stages. The first stage is the stage we've just completed, which is creating the world and writing the first sort of stories to be the foundation, right? The first set of stories to be the foundation. Now we're moving into the second phase, which is inviting other people to contribute to this world, to read what we've done, see the frameworks that we've set up, be inspired creatively, and then tell their own stories set in this world using these frameworks. And those invitations have gone out. We've invited people, specific people. It's a kind of controlled expansion, if you will, just to see how that works. And then once that is done, then we open it up everywhere. Anybody in the world will be able to send a message saying, here's my pitch. I read your story Bible. I read the description of this planet. I really have a great idea to tell a story here. Here's my idea. Summary, 1 paragraph. The collective, we read it, we take a vote, yes or no. If we say yes, you go write it. The story belongs to you, not us. It's your story, you've just taken it from the world, and you have a kind of community obligation. Whatever you make from the story in any form, up to $1,000 is yours. Anything beyond that, you have a obligation, not enforceable, but a kind of community sense, right, to contribute 10% back to the collective, to enable us continue expanding this world and getting more people involved and creating and being inspired. And the hope is that eventually a lot of African authors and writers will get to have stories set in this world, share this kind of creation together, working with each other, and building out our imaginations from there. So that is the plan. And just to kind of give you a sample taster of what we've created so far, I will ask Cheryl to read from one of her stories. I'm going to pretend it's not one of my favorites because I don't have favorites, but it is one of my favorites.
All right, the title of the story is The Way of Bach. I don't know if I should give a little background first, or I should?
A bit, yeah.
Okay. So this story is set on the planet Mawepina, and it's told from the perspective of a non-human character. So I tried to make it as alienish as possible, while also trying to really express the character's hopes and desires. So here we go. Red is a sign of decay. A new patch of it has bloomed on my 4th left leg, until now the only leg that was still blue. Beneath every hot patch on my shell, the flesh itches. It's Toto calling, reminding me that I cheated it. I've heard Bach say as much when I pass them in Kum. School would be long dead if not for the Madirehi. Easing sideways into a cove, I sink below the sea, pincers opening wide as the cold water soothes my pain. I can't go back to the safety of Kum, not when I'm the only Ogbe left in the colony who hunts true nududu. A ripple moves through the water as a jalili fish passes me. Designated nududu 30 generations ago for their ability to glow in the dark, the soft, billowing creatures have shown no growth since. I turn my gaze to the plants that rise up from the water, seeking more promising prey. Their bright leaves and long stalks mock me. Same as last Juzu, same as 10 Juzu past. Everything the same, generation after generation. Only Bach change.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's a really interesting story about, actually, do you want to just give a quick summary of what the story is kind of about? No spoilers, but just like an elevator pitch.
All right. Essentially, the story is set right before, because, okay, so we know this is not a spoiler. We know from the beginning that this planet faces a dark fate. It's going to be destroyed. And so this story takes place just before that happens. And it's focused on these creatures that their main drive is evolution. Every generation, they evolve. So it's not a slow evolution process that we're used to. It's more, every single generation is different from the generation that went before, biologically speaking. And they only eat food towards that target. So they don't just eat for survival, but they deliberately go out and select a particular form of prey that will elevate them. So if they want a particular characteristic, they will eat an animal that has that characteristic so that the next generation will incorporate that into their biology. And so this is how they've been living for generations and generations. And when the story takes place, they're sort of facing a crisis because there's no new food. And they're trying to figure out what to do. And at this point, they encounter humans, which leads to less than pleasant circumstances. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm not going to say humans are the villain of the story, but humans are the villain of the story. So thanks for that. I hope that sample gives you an idea of the intricacy and the level of complexity and the ideas that we're wrestling with most of these stories and with this world. So talking a bit more about the process itself, right, of writing collaboratively, because I'm sure as everyone, well, as most people here can imagine, writing is a lonely business, right? It's the kind of thing you do by yourself in a dark room with a cup of coffee, and you write, and eventually you talk to people about it when it's done. But in this case, we are creating collaboratively, right? We have calls and discussions about concepts and ideas, and then we go off and write, and someone reads it and gives feedback, and then you iterate and until you come to a point where the story works within the context of the world. And I call it a kind of shared dreaming, because you have to be imagining the same things, right? And that's not always the way the human brain works, right? Everybody's brain sees things a bit differently. So, Dare, do you want to talk a bit about the process of writing collaboratively? What's it been like, especially being one of the authors that's still living on the continent? Because a few of us are scattered around. What's your perspective and experience been so far?
Well, it has been very exciting. That's not the word I want to use. It's been stimulating, I think. But I didn't expect that. I was a bit worried going into the idea of a shared world, because generally, when you write as a solo person, you still have to collaborate in a sense with other people, with the editor, or in case of an anthology where maybe it's a shared theme, you kind of have to read other people's stories. But there's never that sense of like the playground, as you said. So I was a bit worried that I wouldn't be able to keep up because I live in Nigeria and there's no electricity and my battery is always low and Airtel acts up. And when I learned that there will be Zoom calls, I realized I wouldn't be able to be on video as much because my room is my room. So because last year I actually wasn't able to write, and I realized it's because I've been writing alone a lot and the well sort of dried up. And so I realized I needed collaboration. So this year I was in 2 collaborative efforts, but this has been the more rewarding and promising of those 2 efforts. And I really expected conflict when it started, but what usually happens is we get carried away and the Zoom calls go on for at least 30 minutes longer because the ideas are just pouring out on some days. And of course, there are the days where people are at airports or someone can't be there or someone...
You mean me?
Yes. And San needs to go feed her dog and things are happening. So, but generally the energy has been great and it's evolved organically, and people are so excited to sending new stories, to sending pitches, new ideas. I mean, I haven't sent in any of my pitches yet because, well, the things I mentioned, but I'm excited to get there and also explore the world more. So it's been, and coming to the idea of like community and I guess Africanness, I feel like that's the future of creativity, just people working together, especially with ideas like the metaverse, etc., coming through. So it sort of gives me that idea of like a textual metaverse in a sense.
So. Textual metaverse.
Yes, so
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so before we continue our discussion, I'll quickly throw it open to the audience for one question. Then we come back and then we do more questions. So does anyone have a burning question that they want to ask? Okay, we'll start with the lady in the front.
Good morning. Okay, I'm very worried about your story. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm already wondering, do you people already have an estimated idea of what the end should look like?
What?
The end of the story, what it should look like. Yeah, and also because, you said people input their ideas. What if you see a story that overshadows yours? How do you input it into that story? And also, do you also have a timeline for this story, when it should end? I'm sorry.
Okay. No, those are 3 questions, but that's fine. I think 2 of them can be merged. Okay, so I'll answer the first question, and I will let someone else, maybe Cheryl, can answer the second one. So your first question, which is, when will the story end? Simple answer, never. There is no one story. What we've done is essentially created a framework for many stories. So, as I said, 10 stories have been written already. And you can read each of them by themselves, and they work alone. Now, if you understand the framework that the story came from, it's a richer experience. You get more out of it. If you read multiple stories and you start to see the connections between them and how they're all kind of tending towards a larger story, then it's even better. But it's not necessary. So, simple example that everybody could kind of work with is, think of it a bit like the Marvel Universe, right? Or like a comic book issue, right? You can read one issue of a comic book. If you read the set, maybe it's a 7-issue special, you get a complete story. But there will be more, and that character probably has a history that goes back even to the 60s. And more people just keep telling new stories using the same characters, the same frameworks, and so on. And that's essentially what we want. In fact, to me, success for the Southieverse would be if the Southieverse outlives me. If I'm like 80 or 90, and there's some young author, somewhere in Uganda, pitching stories to the new set of people that are in the Southie collective, and I've retired on a nice pension from the Southieverse because we're getting royalties. Okay, fine. I'll be happy. But I would love for it to not end, for the playground to keep growing and expanding and so on. Your second question was regarding, sorry, can you just remind me? The timeline. Do we have a timeline for the stories? Does anyone want to take that?
Do you want to take it? Okay. Do we have a timeline for the stories? I mean, we have a timeline for the first batch of stories, just because, we have a specific plan. But in terms of the stories in general, no. The idea is for this to be something that keeps going forever and ever, as long as possible. And like Wale already said, it's such a big universe that the possibilities for stories are endless. I honestly don't think it's possible to get to a point where we're like, okay, there's no more room for stories. So we hope to keep going as long as possible.
Can I just add in there? So what Wale said earlier is the next phase in getting other people into the fold. And what's actually happening now is some of us have multiple stories, which is just really encouraging. We've got the 10 stories that we've kind of birthed since the beginning, but now seeing other kind of flashes of inspiration just shows that we're definitely ready for the next phase, bringing other writers in, sharing our world with them, and as Dara alluded to, this support system that we've got. I mean, yeah.
Okay. It's all right, man.
Right. Yeah, no, good. Writing in isolation most of the time, and then coming into this, just the support. There's never been an argument. Ideas just get bigger and bigger. Nothing gets kind of stripped down. It's just building and building on this world. So yeah, as a writer, it's been good to see that other writers experience what you experience. All the advice that writers say, you're going to have blocks, you're going to have problems writing, you're going to have problems and self-doubt, particularly. I didn't know what I was going to add to the world coming into it. I just thought I needed to do this, and yeah, this is where we are. I mean, we're at Ake Festival, so yeah.
You know, this is really one of the things I was looking forward to doing when we first had the idea for this world, because it came to me actually through Fabrice Guerrier, who is a Haitian American. He runs a production company called Syllable, and they specialize in creating like shared worlds and community writing. And he approached me, and he was like, through Brittle Paper. He'd read some of my work, some of the anthologies I had edited, and he said, you know what, we should do something like this for African authors. And I kind of took it and ran away with it because it's now bigger than I think even he had in mind initially. But you can see the potential and what it means to all of us. It's not just a creative springboard and a shared world in the sense of the shared elements of plot and characters and themes and all that, but it's the shared creation itself, the act of creating collaboratively that also has meaning. And not just that, but as I mentioned earlier, we love to publish and continue developing, also financially supporting the community as well as we make more and more money or whatever we get from the world, right? So there's multiple layers and aspects to this, and we're kind of trying to move away from this hyper-individualist, hyper-capitalist idea of what creative production means, because it has infected, I think, a lot of writers and writing. There's almost this cutthroat approach to, well, I need to create the best thing because if someone else is creating a good story, it makes me not as good and reduces opportunities for me. And actually, no, not really. I don't buy any of that at all. I love reading the stuff that we've come up with together. I love seeing them take ideas that I mentioned and do something spectacular with it. Like, it's shared creation, and we all know we're working together, and we want to bring more people in. And I hope once we get to the third stage, when we open it up for anyone to be able to pitch a story, I really hope we will be able to get more from people in this room even, potentially. You have an idea, you read one of the stories, you're inspired, you're like, you know what, I want a sequel. You can write it yourself, right? If you love Black Panther or something, and you have a great idea for a sequel, sorry, if you send an email to Disney, good luck getting a response. But with Sauti, we would love for that to be the case, where you could read one of the stories, or just read the description, and be like, I have a great idea, you send in a pitch. Now, we might say the pitch doesn't really work, or maybe there's a similar story already done, so you might need to revise it, but the opportunity will exist to become and join and tell stories as part of the community. So we'll go back to the audience soon, but just a few more questions for the audience quickly. For the panel. So Stephen, which aspect of Sauti excites you the most creatively going forward?
Well, creatively, I think the sound magic is one of the most exciting elements to work with. But as I mentioned, I think it's really going into the next phase of inviting other people. As I mentioned, the second round of stories that we've got is just like adding to this world in amazing ways. There hasn't been a boring pitch that's been coming through, and any of the works that are in their first drafts are exciting and interesting to read. I've got a lot of catching up to do in terms of what's in the folder. So and that's exciting. So I think when I look at some of the new additions to the world, I'm just really excited for what outside individuals are going to be able to pitch to the collective. And it's just amazing what we've created and how broad we can actually get with the ideas. And the sound magic as well. I know Tendai Huchu mentioned, having magic is all well and good, but as long as you've got parameters, and sound magic comes with those sound parameters, and we're kind of pushing at those boundaries to see what we can and can't do. You can't just magically get your protagonist out of a bad situation, and I'm working on a story that's around that in a space where there is no sound cannot happen. So we'll see how I get that individual out of the soundless. That's where excited.
Awesome. And I guess we've been talking a lot about writing because this is the Ake Arts and Books Festival, and we mostly think of it in terms of books, but there's a lot of art. So the video you saw at the beginning was created by the collective. We do have visual artists as part of the group.
I think we should play the video at the end of this, by the way.
Okay, we can play the video again for those that missed it at the beginning. All right, cool. So all the visual art was done by a member of the collective, Toba Kalejaye. The voices you heard narrating the video, that's us. And again, giving that sense of community creation. We layered all the voices on top of each other. So it's not just one person reading the creation myth. It's different people reading all together, voices layered on top of each other. I wrote the creation myth together with Stephen. Well, more accurately, he started writing it and I just jumped in and I was like, hey, let's do this, let's do that. And then it became this collaborative thing, right? Same with most of the ideas that we've been working on.
But the creation myth was really embodies the process that we went through. You know, we spoke about the magic, we spoke about the planets, and then worked our way backwards. And so for me, my input into the creation myth was taking all the ideas of the collective and melding them into kind of the language of mythology, the mother goddess being central. There were, I was inspired by some of the African cosmologies that center around mother goddess. And so it was really taking everybody's ideas and putting those together. So yeah, that is testament to the working relationships we've got.
Exactly, and as Dari reminded me, that's just a piece of the myth. There is a very elaborate myth, as with almost every culture in the world, right? We have elaborate, complex myths to explain our understanding of the world. So we have created that for this fictional world. Okay, we have closer to 8 minutes. We'll take a few more questions from the audience. We can go to the back. You had your hand up the first time. Chisom, right? Yeah.
Thank you very much. My question quickly is, this world, it seems very broad. 5 planets, of course. So definitely there are lots of laws and rules and little things that you have to consider. So what if a person is writing a story, and I think it goes to the question she asks about one story overshadowing another. I think she meant probably, what if you're writing something that clashes or conflicts with a law that has already been put in place? Say maybe the development of a star system or universe, a planet. And the person writes something that differs. How do you tend to address that? Or do you mean that the writers have to read the entire history of the planet and everything to know, to digest? It seems pretty broad, you know? So
okay, I'll take that since I'm the de facto editor for this world, so the editing duties fall to me. Simple answer is whenever somebody comes into the world, actually we've published the Story Bible online. That's number one. So, and that's the abridged version of the Story Bible. So what's a Story Bible? Basically it's a summary of all the key elements of the world. So the basic expectation is that anyone coming into this world should read the Story Bible. This is like minimum entry point, right? We've kept it as short as possible, only the bare essentials. That should be enough to write a story that doesn't have any major conflicts with anything. There might be minor ones. I'll tell you, I'm the editor. I've read all the stories. I'm familiar with everything. If there is any potential clash, I'll highlight it, even suggest a way that you can keep your central idea without, changing what you really wanted to do too much, but still let it fit into the world. I think I've done this with everybody's stories at this point, so I'm experienced in doing it. So we do have a system for managing that. But yes, you come in with information, minimum information, you write, and there's a review process. And that's it. Sorry. Okay, Abdul Karim is very excited. Please, yes. Question.
Yeah, I'm just going to take this sitting. Abdul Karim Baba Aminu. This is directly to you, Wale. This sounds like really, really awesome. I told you I felt like jumping on, but I felt I was kind of too late. But I'm happy to hear that, it's always there for anyone to jump in. I understand it totally, that when someone seems to not understand it, I, cringe a little, but it's okay, it's, yeah. So the question is, it sounds like a whole lot of work. I've read Incomplete Solutions. When's your next book? How will you have time to bring it out?
Okay, sir, this is a Saudi panel. But if you must know, my next book is out next year. It's called Shigidi. It's a novel, by the way. So it's a fantasy novel. I know people were expecting a science fiction novel, but no. You get a fantasy novel first. The science fiction novel will come after. So yes. Cool. Lara? Question that is not for me, preferably. Oh, yes.
My question is, like, when do readers like me get to meet Sauti? I know you're saying there's stuff online, but like, when do we actually get to like read the anthology?
Unfortunately, another question I'm probably best situated to answer. Okay, fine. I will answer. When do you get to see the stories? The plan is to have a essentially fundamental set of stories come out by next year. We're currently negotiating with the publisher. We've spoken to several publishers already. We're trying to get the best deal possible for everyone, which is why it's taking a bit of time. However, the other thing we're doing is, like I said, once you've written a story in this world, the story belongs to you. So all of us, the founding members of the collective, have written individual stories. And for those that have written more than one story, they're already trying to place the stories somewhere else. So you might start seeing stories from the Sautiverse appear in magazines, literary magazines, online science fiction and fantasy magazines. You will start seeing them come out. As I mentioned, the stories work on their own. However, the more of them you read and you start to see the connectivity, the richer the experience will be. So as from next year, you should start seeing stories from the Sautiverse appearing in the world. Sounds like a bomb. Sauti, you know what? Cheryl, you take it. Or actually, maybe, or Stephen? Stephen better? Yeah.
Well, Sati is voice.
Voice. In Swahili.
Yeah.
So we use a lot of words that are rooted from African languages. We borrow them, but then we apply the Sauti naming philosophy to adjust it. So in Swahili, Sauti means voice, but then we add a double sound to the U to kind of create that sense of resonance. So it's Sauti, right? That's the version that we are using. And some of the names of the planets actually mean song in different African languages. So again, everything relating to sound and the voice and language, and it all comes back to that theme. Yeah. Sumto, you had a question? Oh, yes, yeah, we're running out of time, okay. We're going to take 2 more questions and we're done.
One more question.
Okay, one.
And we're playing the video.
Lola has spoken.
We need
and
the
then
video
we'll play
ready.
and
Make
we're
it
done.
very quick, this one.
Okay.
Video.
Okay, so like we've said, this is a very broad world, and I was wondering, when new writers come on board, and just even looking at our own world, it's this massive, just Nigeria, we have like tribes all over the place. And for this world, a new writer comes on board, and is there room, is there an opportunity for them to maybe create something different, maybe a distinct culture, because there are like dozens of culture, yes, dozens of animals, dozens of people as well. So when a new writer comes on board, is there that room for, this slight, maybe a little culture, or something different for them to also add to the world? And then just a little addition. When we talk about sound being the core factor of this world, do you believe that, how does it affect the other sensory details when sound is like this core factor? What does it do to the other sensory details as well? So that's it.
Okay. Cheryl, do you want to take the first question?
Okay. So the first question was, is there room for new writers coming in to bring in, creating a new culture or a new... I mean, I guess the answer to that would be yes. it just, again, it just goes back to making sure that nothing clashes with what already exists. But the worlds are so big and so broad that there's so much room to create a new thing as long as it fits in, as long as it makes sense with the rest of the world. And we've already had that experience with the writers so far, coming up with new things. So yeah, there's definitely room, always room.
Join me in giving a massive Ake Festival appreciation, applause, everything for these guys who are doing something